This is Running on Empty Food Review. It's a conspiracy theorist cousin here, and we're going to be digging into a nice, juicy burger. Actually, it's going to be a big bagel that we're going to be digging into. Joking aside, we're going to be looking into an article by Anton Chaitkin of the Executive Intelligence Review called The Roy Cohn Machine and Dirty Dick Morris. And this is going to make some connections of kind of the gap between Lewis Rosentiel's blackmail circles and today, the Epstein blackmail circle. There's a big chunk of history that everybody's missing here, and it's between that time and now generally was filled by the Hollinger Corporation and its organization of the mega group through Lord Conrad Black as one of those major organizing forces. That's not to say he was the only one there, but if you understand how big the Hollinger Corporation was and who was on its board and the kinds of operations that it was running, including the emergence of the right-wing Likud party out of Golda Meir's party in Israel, you would look at it a little more importantly than you are now. So we're going to go and read this article. I'm going to try to picture-in-picture stuff later in editing, but I tried to download Manicam and it sucks. So go and give them a downvote. Give me a like. Give me a couple likes. If you have different Russian bot accounts, go ahead and give me several likes. And subscribe and hit that little bell. Okay. So here's the article. The Roy Cohn Mob and Dirty Dick Morris by Anton Chaitkin. Richard Morris, political strategist to the president, is a product and trainee of the central machine of vice and treachery in the Anglo-American world, an apparatus whose criminality extends into the greatest tragedies and outrages against our civilization in recent decades. Dick Morris' gangster professional methods of bold lying and fraudulent work, his record of betraying his client, the president, while working directly for the president's enemies, reflects the Morris family's lifelong links to master criminal Roy Cohn. America's Americans remember Roy Cohn and revile his memory as the fascist chief counsel to Joseph McCarthy's Senate committee in the early 1950s political witch hunts. Later, Cohn became the committee of sleaze, the commissar of sleaze in New York City, representing the interests of mobsters while exerting corrupt influence over both the Democratic and Republican parties, all the way to Washington. Dick Morris's father, attorney Eugene J. Morris, is Roy Cohn's first cousin. Cohn was an intimate with the Morrises from childhood up until his death from AIDS in 1986. Roy Cohn was an ever-present force in Dick Morris's life as Morris was growing up and once stepped into the profession of political fixer. It was Eugene Morris who gave Cohn's biographer Nicholas von Hoffman the inside story on how Eugene's Aunt Dora had turned her son Roy into a sissy, and the senior Morris supplied von Hoffman with rare Cohn family photographs going back to 1920s and 1930s. Eugene Morris had been high-placed representative of the Cohn machine in both New York and London since Dick's childhood. And in the case of Dickie, the acorn didn't fall very far from the tree. Having been fired by the U.S. Senate, the disgraced Roy Cohn started a career in the late 1950s. Attorney and fixer for organization crime bosses, he became feared as a potential deployer of killers who was himself politically protected, a whirling dervish of extortion, sodomy, blackmail, and corruption of justice from his friend FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover on down. Dulles-Dewey and the Killer Elite. Roy Cohn's strange bedfellow relationship to gay Edgar Hoover is well known, but the Cohn story is far more complex and involves the sponsorship and protection of Cohn by some of America's best known liberal Wall Street Republicans, including some powerful people associated with the One World Federalist apparatus that Cohn and McCarthy purportedly battled during the height of the Red Scare. Some of these Cohn patrons are on the record as detesting him personally. Nevertheless, at crucial moments, they gave a boost to his career, kept him out of prison, and used him as a pivotal figure in their Murder Incorporated apparatus. The Roy Cohn story, and by extension, the Dirty Dick Morris story, reveals just how close some of America's most respected citizens above suspicion are to be the lowest gutters of organized crime and dope trafficking. Among the list of Cohn's employees and protectors were his Anglophile power brokers John Foster Dulles and his younger brother Alan Dulles, and John Foster's protege Thomas E. Dewey. The Dulles brothers and Dewey assembled the American end of the British-Canadian-U.S. grouping of the bloodiest assassins and fanciest gentlemen. And the political brothel, Roy Cohn was a queen, and Dick Morris learned the trade of intrigue and duplicity. As Secretary of State and CIA Director, respectively, John Foster and Alan Dulles had protected and managed Roy Cohn's most flagrant adventurism as Joe McCarthy's counsel. John Foster warned U.S. diplomats in 1953 to spare no effort in spurring Cohn's witch hunt. Yet publicly, John Foster Dulles denounced the despicable Cohn at every opportunity and undoubtedly found Cohn a thoroughly foul, albeit politically useful person. So this is my editorial here. Everybody's attacking Trump, especially those who are big figures in the New York political establishment. Michael Bloomberg, but tons of the people that are involved in what's called a Partnership for New York City, which came out of Big Mac, which is the Municipal Assistance Corporation. In the background, support Trump. Many of them are mega group members, and some of them are representatives of the Bush family, including George Herbert Walker IV, who's the treasurer there, Stephen Schwarzman, and others. And this originally came from the Lazard-Feres synarchist banker named Felix Rohatyn, who has actually been spotted by people having very, very intimate lunch or luncheons with Donald Trump in New York City. And he's also, through the MAC, created the environment, the economic environment for Trump's success in the real estate business through all of basically the gentrification of the entire New York City. Now, this guy, Felix Rohatyn, was one of the main brokers of the fascist Augustus Pinochet. So we're going to move on here shortly. I just have to make sure the thing's still recording. As Secretary of State and CIA, I think I just read that. In 1957, a leading member of the Dulles-Dewey apparatus, Dulles' former law partner, New York State Judge David W. Peck, personally arranged for Roy Cohn to be taken in to the old-line New York Democratic Party law firm Sachs, Bacon, and O'Shea. Judge Peck soon resigned and bench and rejoined the Dulles brothers' firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, while Cohn immediately made Sachs Bacon into the New York nerve center of criminal mafia assembly by Dulles and Dewey. The roots of the relationship between Dulles and Dewey crowd and the modern criminal apparatus go back to 1931. Under the Prohibition law, Charles Lucky Luciano and Murder Inc. boss Meyer Lansky unified the bootlegging operation cartel of all rackets. Important rivals such as Al Capone were jailed and murdered. Two huge corporations emerged from this bloodbath after repeal of Prohibition. Canada-based Seagram's Liquor, half owned by Lansky partners, the Bronfman family, and half owned by British Whiskey Trust, and U.S.-based Shenley Liquors, founded by Lansky's partner, retired bootlegger Lewis Rosentiel. John Foster Dulles, attorney for the biggest London New York bankers and fervent backer of Adolf Hitler, new Nazi regime at the time, took over the New York Young Republican Club and made its leadership into a Dulles-run political secret society. The purpose was to prepare for more criminal centralization. Many of Dulles' personal cadres were assisted federal prosecutors in New York. Among these were Dulles' political trainee Thomas E. Dewey and David M. Peck. In 1935, Dewey was made a New York special prosecutor responsible for investigating organized crime. He jailed Lucky Luciano, leaving Lansky the undisputed boss of the National Crime Syndicate. Entirely under Dulles' management, Dewey was elected New York governor in 1942. Dewey freed Luciano from prison and exiled him to Italy in 1946. A pretty face was put on this, but the allegation that caged Luciano and the free Lansky had arranged with the Secret Services for the Mafia to police the New York waterfront during the war, protecting against Nazi sabotage. In constant cooperation with Anglo-American Secret Service teams, which were directed by the Dulles brothers and Averell Harriman on the American end, the freed Luciano restarted the world's main narcotics trafficking juice for the Lansky Empire. Once again, there's Averell Harriman, the Churchill that also informed Lewis Rosentiel of when to go into the bootlegging business and when to get out of it. Um, Harriman married Churchill, if you don't know that. The Kingmakers. After World War II, the Dulles brothers set up another New York-based secret society called the Kingmakers. Entering on Thomas Dewey, Sullivan, and Cromwell partners, Charles S. Hamilton Jr. organized the Kingmakers. As the director of the New York Port Authority and a labor law expert, Hamilton was positioned to aid Dewey Lansky-Luciano adventures. The Kingmakers members included judges, prosecutors, and political figures. The Dewey-Dulles reorganization of crime had some helpers who were particularly important to the Con Moore's story. Paul Lockwood, chief assistant to Dewey throughout the 1930s and 1940s, had by the 1950s become executive vice president of Lansky partner Rosentiel's Schenley Liquors. Lockwood was later joined by Louis Nichols, Roy Cohn's political plaything, who shifted from being chief assistant to J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI to Schenley vice president in the Con Mafia orbit. Most dramatic was the rise of Jerry Finkelstein, Dewey's staff member in the cynical 1935-36 organized crime investigation. As will be seen, Finkelstein went on to acquire enormous wealth and a star role in Roy Cohn's Dick Morris underworld. Former New York Governor Thomas E. Dewey and U.S. Solicitor General J. Lee Rankin went to London in 1958 to set up a British-dominated international body of elite lawyers called World Peace Through Law. Dick Morris's father, Eugene Morris, was the publicly identified as the leader of this lawyers group in the succeeding period. In 1958, Thomas Dewey and his son bought the Crosby Miller Company. According to May 20, 1976, they bought the Crosby Miller Company in an article by Howard Cohn in Rolling Stone magazine. Allen Dulles gave Dewey $2 million in CIA money for the purchase. The Dewey-controlled company then took over the Mary Carter Paint Company, armed with the Dewey name. Mary Carter Paint served as a protective umbrella for Lansky's mob, moving in Caribbean gambling, money laundering, and drug trafficking. In the late 1960s, a Royal Commission investigated organized crime in the Caribbean islands, helped finish off all gambling rivals of the Mary Carter Paint Company, which meanwhile changed its name to Resorts International. And this is my commentary again. Resorts International is the company that Trump bought, and I think they own a lot of the New Jersey Atlantic City casinos. Eventually, with the help of Drexel, is that right? Man, I can't remember. I think it's Drexel Lambert. Whoever was behind the whole junk bond scandal thing, or junk bond crash rather, they helped another guy, Merv Griffin, move in and do a hostile takeover of Trump's Resorts International. Another note on that, though, is everybody says Trump's a stupid businessman for going bankrupt, yada, yada, yada. Well, the big thing is, if you understand tax shelters, with real estate, oftentimes you can write off your losses. Trump did not always lose money on all the stuff that he went bankrupt about or the real estate that he lost. There's certain things that you can do, especially if you're working in a larger organization. They can send in somebody like Trump to kind of prime the property to be transferred to somebody else, and in those transfers, you can gain tax credits and things like this in order that you end up not paying any taxes. I might try to upload a video that shows how these Japanese companies were doing this in the Bahamas, in case you need to grasp that a little fuller. It's called How Does a Tax Shelter Work? It's from some great documentary on the issue. But going on, the Kennedy assassination. In 1958, just after being installed at Sachs-Bacon by Dulles-Dewey apparatus, Roy Cohn became president of the Lionel Corporation, the most famous manufacturer of toy trains. Montreal crime boss Joseph Bonanno became Lionel's chairman. That same year, Major Lewis Mortimer Bloomfield, a wartime British intelligence officer and the Special Operations Executive, and an attorney for the Montreal-based Bronfman family, incorporated the Permanent Industrial and Expositions Company known as Permindex, with himself as president and chairman. Major Bloomfield and Roy Cohn were both intimates of J. Edgar Hoover. Since World War II, Bloomfield had been British intelligence liaison to Hoover, with oversight responsibilities for FBI Division 5 counterintelligence, and since Cohn's red hunting days, Cohn had maintained intimate political and personal relations with Hoover, the two of them also reportedly sharing sex with their mutual financial sponsor, Shenley's president Lewis Rosentiel. Personnel working for Roy Cohn and Joe Bonanno at Lionel Corp's Texas subsidiary, International Control Corp, are identified in a buried citation in the Warren Commission report on the assassination of President Kennedy as having worked in New Orleans in conjunction with Bloomfield's Permidex operations on the matter, which would soon come before the world with terrifying force. In that period, Roy Cohn was increasingly placed under suspicion and investigation by Robert Kennedy, who became U.S. Attorney General in 1961. President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. The Warren Commission announced that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone perpetrator of a senseless crime. But the New Orleans District Attorney James Garrison pointed to the Montreal-based Permidex organization as the planners and perpetrators of the JFK murder. The world's attention was focused on the Garrison prosecution of a Permidex board member and prominent New Orleans socialite and Anglophile Clay Shaw for conspiracy to murder the president. Garrison's prosecution came under brutal attack from the Dulles forces and from Kennedy's own national security advisor, McGeorge Bundy. J. Lee Ratkin, partner of Dewey and Dulles in the creation, the World Peace Through Law Group, had been executive director and general counsel of the Warren Commission. Rankin ran all aspects of the official federal inquiry into the president's murder, and all contacts between the Warren Commission and its staff went through Rankin. Rankin was the Warren Commission's liaison to Hoover's FBI and to the Central Intelligence Agency, whose former director, Allen Dulles, President Kennedy had fired. It was only as the result of the suppression of two crucial pieces of evidence during the 1969 New Orleans trial that Clay Shaw avoided conviction for the conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy. Had Shaw been convicted, the entire edifice of murder and cover-up would have come crashing down, and the role of Bloomfield, Cohn, and others in the JFK assassination would have been the subject of worldwide attention. The Dulles-Rankin Warren Commission fraud would have been thoroughly exposed. And if you understand where Jim Garrison initially got the clues, it was from Lord Bertrand Russell's, who's no friend of the United States, who's from his secretary, and Bertrand Russell himself, who is often regarded as an empiricist, the father of the modern scientific outlook, and I mean modern scientific outlook, and one of the most high IQ individuals in the world, ran something called the Who Killed Kennedy Committee in England. But he tried to remove this British connection entirely when he did this. It was one of the initial conspiracy theorist conferences ever run in the world. But going on, Roy Cohn's New York machine. After running the Warren Commission, Rankin went to New York as city corporation counsel under Mayor John Lindsay, beginning in 1967. Rankin immediately took off to Switzerland with Eugene Morris, who had been for several years chairman of the Herbal Renewal section of the World Peace Through Law Group. And we talk about Municipal Assistance Corporation. This is where it comes from, Urban Renewal to the World Peace Through Law Group. Beginning early in the 1960s into the middle 1970s, the senior Morris commuted between London and New York for regular strategies meetings with what is described as top British lawyers, who apparently represented British real estate interests in New York. At the 1967 Geneva Conference of the British-run Lawyers Group, Morris chaired a panel of urban renewal with Rankin participating in the panel. At this time, Cohn's underworld clients included Thomas and Joseph Gambino family of the New York Mafia boss of bosses, Carlo Gambino, Carmine Galante, alleged Mafia executive of Westchester County, Pat Tony Salerno, and Frank Cocchiero, alleged subordinate of Sam the plumber Cavalcanti. And the Cavalcantis were the family the Sopranos were based off of. Cohn was a partner of Joe Bonanno and his henchmen and a close comrade of Lansky partner Mo Dalitz. Gangsters would meet together in Cohn's law office so that the attorney-client privilege would prevent them from molestation by law enforcers. Jerry Finkelstein, a Dulles-Dewey group organized operative from 1930s, was one of Cohn's closest business partners and clients. By 1963, James Finkelstein had total control of the New York Law Journal. This was the New York legal profession's daily paper, which was given extraordinary power by Cohn's father, Judge Albert Cohn, who decreed it the exclusive official medium for publication of legal notices. Eugene Morris joined the leadership team of the Law Journal as the Cohn family personal representative. From 1965 on, Morris edited the weekly journal Law column, which he often wrote himself. The paper greatly enhanced Roy Cohn's power over the New York judges and prosecutors. In his heyday, Democratic Party officials would come aboard Cohn's yacht to decide with him who would be appointed to what bench. Jerry Finkelstein's son, James, meanwhile had married Kathy Rosentiel, the granddaughter of Lansky's crime partner, Lewis Rosentiel. Roy Cohn was the lawyer and fixer for all of these Finkelstein and Rosentiels. When Lewis lay down dying in 1976, Roy tried to get control of the massive Shenley fortune, allegedly by forging Rosentiel's will. Roy Cohn escaped disbarment, but was disbarred much later for other infractions. In the late 1960s, a new generation of Anglophile lawyers close to Averell Harriman and George Bush family took up new reins from the Dulles and Dewey, directing the New York political establishment to get behind the election of John B. Lindsay as mayor. The new group, called the Gotham Club or Gotham Committee, worked with Roy Cohn on fixing the Democratic Party through attorney Edwin Weasel Jr., Cohn's lifelong friend. Weasel was a member of Prince Philip and Major Bloomfield's 1001 Club. Weasel and his father, a Harriman ally and Paramount Pictures director, were relied upon by President Lyndon B. Johnson to handle the New York Democrats after Kennedy's murder put Johnson in the White House. Now, another editorial here. 1001 Club is pretty much what I referred to it before as the Club of Isles, which is where the Hollinger Corporation, the Barclays, the KPMG, and tons of other organizations, corporations in this blackmail ring, or proximate to this blackmail ring, are from. And that's generally regarded as a Rothschild-controlled group of corporations. Because what the Rothschilds do is things like Blackstone Group. They'll come in for the first couple years as founding board members, and then they'll boot, they'll get off the board. But they appoint all of the people and put into place all of the people that they want into place that can continue controlling the corporation. Going on. President Johnson would publicly admit on 2 occasions that he was terrified of what he described as murder incorporated right out inside our government. That was behind the assassination of John Kennedy, in which he believed was poised to eliminate him the first time he stepped out of line. The Republican John Lindsay regime of 1965 to 73, with J. Lee Rankin as city council, ushered in bankers' revolution in American politics. Beginning in 1967, there were new demands to cut the budget, bust the unions, and crush the poor. Young Dick Morris, the future advisor of President Clinton, graduated from Columbia University in 1967, just in time to join this brutal effort at the outset. Dick Morris was hired as a researcher propagandist by the Citizens Budget Commission immediately upon graduation. The CBC had been founded in 1932 by big banks and was chaired by Columbia University President Nicholas Murray Butler, a fanatical Anglophile and one of the leading American organizers for the movement which put Adolf Hitler into power in Germany. Butler was also responsible for bringing the Comintern-sponsored Frankfurt School of Radical Marxist Freudians into the United States and setting them up at Columbia University once Hitler came to power. The CBC had demanded budget cuts under the terrifying conditions of poverty and unemployment of the 1930s. In 1968-67, they were the propaganda center for Lindsay and the Ford Foundation President McGeorge Bundy in the drive for the public acceptance of an era of necessary pain, hospital closings, welfare cutbacks, and shutdown of excessive government. The CBC trustees were directed who directed the work and training of employee Dick Morris, included executives of the biggest British-controlled Wall Street firms and Anglo-American real estate moguls and slumlords. Dick Morris did this work from 1967 to 1974, helping to bulldoze the living standards, services, and jobs of New Yorkers and shifting the entire country into frantic financial and real estate swindles of the succeeding era. From 1970 to 1972, while Dick Morris was chief research analyst for this mayhem at CBC, Jerry Finkelstein served as chairman of the Democratic Party of New York City. It was precisely then that Dick Morris got into the New York Democratic Party politics. Yet in his 1978 book, Bum Rap in American Cities, The Real Causes of Urban Decay, Dick Morris leaves out any description of his family connections to criminal power centers, badly asserting that in the 1970-72 period, I began working with liberal Democratic political leaders and candidates in New York City, taking advantage of my familiarity with city finance to gain access to them and to help shape their ideas. Sources familiar with the early years of Dick Morris's career in New York's Democratic Party politics were far less kind. One longtime Manhattan political insider described Morris as a right-wing hack running a group of young political operatives tied to Roy Cohn, who referred to themselves as the Special Forces, adding that Morris had boosted a group of mob-owned candidates for city and state office. Dick Morris' first polling consultant job came in 1974 when his access to the political world had been established. It was not long afterward that Morris slithered into the life-rising Democratic politician Bill Clinton. So I kind of slipped in here because the last recording cut off in the middle. So I think that the article pretty much speaks for itself. One thing that you see is the origins of this Jeff Epstein related ruse, the scheme that he was perpetrating. It's actually something that's closely held by British intelligence, the British Special Operations Executive. So if you want to see that from the top down, it's basically Lord Beaverbrook, who was the founder of BBC, and also the mentor of Sir Rupert Murdoch of Fox News and Conrad Black of the Hollinger Corporation, which owned the Telegraph, Jerusalem Post, a lot of the Sun Media Group. And then so underneath Beaverbrook, there was Sir William Stevenson, and Major Mortimer Bloomfield was Stevenson's right-hand man. And you also have guys like the founder of modern marketing and advertising, Sir David Ogilvy. And then underneath Bloomfield, Bloomfield is working with the Bronfman family. They set up these corporations, namely Permandex, which is mob associated, and he's also operating during Iran-Contra out of Credit Suisse Bank. But in the meantime, there's all of these people going back and forth, connections going back and forth between Lansky, Cohn, Thomas Dewey, Rosentiel, and you get an idea of the fact that this is an Anglo-Israeli operation. The Clintons were brought in by this operation in an attempt to co-opt the Clintons. The reason why, even though Bill Clinton is a Rhodes Scholar, and which is basically you become what they describe it as is turning cowboys into gentlemen. Bill Clinton was always a Midwesterner, and so he did things differently, and I don't think he necessarily wanted to serve the New York Council of Foreign Relations clique. And there's three major players in here. There's New York Council on Foreign Relations, which is kind of the American First Families people. There's the Mega Group, which is the Mossad representation, and then there's the British representation that we see show up in the Hollinger Group, and the royal family that shows up here. and these aspects of the British Special Operations Executive. So I think that's a good summary of what this article demonstrates. You can try to take a look, listen to the article, go and read the article to see how everything fits in. But then this article also shows how people like Dick Morris and these interests helped contribute to the financial dictatorship of New York City that helped Trump rise to prominence under the Municipal Assistance Corporation, now under the partnership of New York City, and that people like Mayor Bloomberg, I really think are hiding the fact that they support Trump. Bloomberg's kind of like a Rockefeller Republican in his policies. I think a liberal Republican. So that's it. Like and subscribe. Click the little bell. Click it 3 times. And I hope you like this new mic. Hopefully it's a little easier to hear me. And I'm sure that's one of the reasons why I'm only getting like 2 minutes of playtime on my videos. So, alright. More coming down the trough for you Jeff Epstein freaks. So long.